Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of One Vision, the FinTech Fuse. This is Theo, your host for today's episode. Welcome back to the show is an old friend whom we had not had the chance to bring him back here since March of 2023. Not that I was counting, but welcome back to the show, Jazz, and lovely to host you again. And for
Thanks.
um and for those of you who are listening, please do make sure that you follow Jazz on LinkedIn. He's the CEO and managing partner at StrategyBRIX, but also a well respected thought leader in risk management. You always see him at Finovate shows, and he always hosts one of the most thoughtful panels on how do we make sure we do not get ourselves in trouble and how do we think more about governance, which is the boring bits but important bits. So I look forward to our chat today, Jazz. Let's
Thanks, Theo. Yeah.
let's go straight to it. Um, I am intrigued. You recently published a paper called "The Universal Commerce Protocol (UCP), Rewriting Compliance for Agentic Commerce." Piqued my interest. Agentic commerce. That's what everyone is talking about. So I'm very excited that we get to dig that deeper today. From a very high level, though, can we kick off with what exactly is UCP and why is everyone so excited?
Uh, Thanks again, Theo, for having me. If you wouldn't have invited me again, I would have probably started knocking at the door, started stalking you. So this is one of my favorite podcasts, and I'm super thrilled and excited to be here. Thanks again. Uh, Gender commerce, UCP. So maybe like to set the background a little bit. Uh, the whole like e-commerce and I'm very intrigued and interested in e-commerce in general. Like when I started my career 22 years ago, I started building a lot of risk and fraud detection systems for the online e-commerce industry back then. So it used to be boots.com. It's way before Amazon ever happened, and how the products and the inventory was managed, and how coupon codes were distributed, and how you would use cards, and how you would manage all the fraud risk. And AML and financial crime wasn't that big of a thing. So I've understood like the supply chain mechanisms and how e-commerce generally works. It is about a 20-ish trillion-dollar industry, which is enormous. There's some like predictions around in the next like 5 6 years, gender commerce is going to be more like a 2.5 to $3 trillion industry. They're expecting this to be in the United States alone. The B2C setup is going to be about $1 trillion. What these numbers generally mean is like this is a pretty big prediction for how what the market size is going to be. That's where a lot of these investments, these conversations, these protocols, and these discussions are stemming from. Largely, there is definitely an active use case. What exactly is UCP? The simplest way of defining what the commerce protocol is here is think of like that's this is your merchant, this is the consumer, there's a road that connects both of them. That road is basically the protocol, and the driver on that road is your AI agent that's going to do all the shopping for you. That's a simple way of like understanding what, let's say, UCP is. A little bit more technical is nothing but a clearer definition that is being laid out to a lot of the merchants in being able to define catalog, categorize their inventory, and explain like exactly what the product classification and the attributes look like. So if I'm Best Buy, this protocol to me means if I'm going to leverage this protocol and I have this one 95-inch Sony flat screen television that I'm trying to sell, all the 10, 15, 20 attributes in terms of like size, color, shape, warranty, refund policy, all of that information, if I can codify and put it on the protocol, it now makes that product that Best Buy has on its shelf a lot easily searchable by my agent rather than my agent going and like scraping websites and trying to like make some assumptions and guesses on where this product is, how much does it cost, what the return policy is, so that it removes and eliminates the guesswork for this agent. And the ultimate goal is for this agent to be able to go back and execute based on the human's requirement that I've laid out to this agent, saying, I want a 95-inch television. It can't be 90. It cannot be 105. Has to be a Sony. It needs a specific color, width, whatever else it might be. It needs to get shipped in like less than 48 hours. The return window has to be like, maybe a warranty has to be like 3 years, whatever it might be. When these criteria are made, and I can give a price range as well, uh, the agent has the authority to go back and execute on my behalf and do everything that I would have done otherwise and wasted like or spent. I wouldn't say wasted. I enjoy the buying process, um, and if I would have spent those X number of hours, I can just lay out those instructions to my agent. My agent can go and do the shopping for me. But if that cataloging and classification is done well by the Amazons, the Best Buys, the Costco's, and the Walmarts of the world, it does make that route of shopping a lot easier, less painful, and hopefully, air quotes, hopefully better for the consumer. And that's a discussion, like that's a topic up for discussion, like how what the impact is going to be on the consumers and all of that stuff down the road. But that's in short what the UCP typically looks like.
I love your analogy of the road and the car because it helps us visualize what this means, right? The parties and the relationship between them and the agent, which is the car on top of it. Now, if I were to extend that, right, the first obvious question I'll have is, you in the paper you wrote about KYA, know your agent, which is different than typically when we think of, know your consumer, the identity part of it. If I were to borrow your analogy, how do I know that car is the car that can actually represent me and not something that's hijacked? How do I know the car has the authority to act on my behalf? So when we think about identity, when we think about authorization, how does this new protocol change the way we're supposed to think about that part of compliance?
I think it's a great question. So if you think about it, it's a problem for both parties. First, the agent that you're sending on your behalf to do the job, and there's a lot of imagination and prediction, and how I'm trying to formulate my thoughts. So please bear with me. So I think there's one lens, which is, what agent do you work with? How do you know this is the right agent? How do you know this agent is working for you right now and not for somebody else? And on the flip side, if I was Best Buy, if I were the merchant, I need to know this is an agent that actually Theo sent, and it's not like some random agent that somebody else hijacked, and I'm gonna go ship this 95-inch Sony television to a warehouse which you're paying for, and then you're going to come back once you look at your charges and you'll be disputing that charge. So it's a problem on both ends. And and I feel like the weight and the intensity of these problems on both ends is, my views are starkly different. So let's maybe talk about the easier part first, which is, if I'm the merchant, chargeback management is going to be a huge, significant problem. The reason is, today, the way chargebacks are handled, I buy a product, use my credit card. That's a little loan that the issuer is extending to me to go and buy this television product, whatever else it might be. Um, I'm buying this product based on a promise that the merchant is making. They're saying this actually works, this is what it does, or a service that they're providing. Once I get the service or the product, and I don't think that I got what I really wanted or what they promised in more specific terms, I would typically go and talk to the merchant and just tell them to give me my money back. And a lot of times they get feisty, and I just go back to my issuer and I'm saying, you extended me this loan, so technically you're supposed to get me my refund. and I'm not paying for this. The issuer then has to go and fight with the merchant, and they put the merchant in a bit of a notice saying you need to prove to us that you actually gave Jazz what he paid for, and then they have to go back and show invoices, how I purchased that product, the delivery evidence, and all of that stuff. Or if it's a service, they have to prove that the service actually happened. I signed the invoice, receipt, whatever else it might be. If they're not able to do that, the issuer has already issued, in most cases, a temporary credit back to me. And if in like X number of days they don't come back, the merchant doesn't come back and prove that that actually was a service that they provided to the promise that they made to me, then I get to keep the money. And the merchant is out of that, money, and their in the long run, their credibility with the issuer, their credibility with the network start falling. The networks especially don't like a lot of chargebacks. That's how we deal with chargebacks today. Now, when you have inserted and injected an agent in the middle, I told the agent do this, agent did something else. I got the product, I paid for it, and I don't like it. If you're using, let's say, something like UCP, categorizing all of these fundamentals on the protocol, and then to be able to go back and for the merchant to go back and prove that no, we actually did exactly what they asked for, and there wasn't. They have to be able to go back and establish authorization. They have to go back and say this was a delegate of the consumer, therefore we are not liable, it's them. This back and forth is a very expensive process on operationally, and chargebacks typically go in the favor of the consumer. So this is going to be a little bit of a dilemma you're going to run into. Um, and of course, like you can imagine, like it's the biggest break in this whole like purchase barrier today is you're going to be taking a trip in the next couple of days. You're off to London for Finovate Europe. A lot of times, like imagine like a couple of years ago. Now I think banks are a little bit more advanced. The moment you take a flight, you take your fancy Cap One card, you swipe it in London, they'll be like, nope, we think it's a fraud charge. We're gonna just like decline this transaction. Then you have to call them. Now they send you a text. Is this you? Say why or no, whatever. What they do is they're like sensing your geolocation, and the moment they say that they see that you're not in your regular habitat, you're like in a new country, new city, or they get a signal from the machine that you're swiping this card on that this seems fraudulent, they just block the charge because they're trying to avoid the chargeback. That's the money that they lose to fraud like every day. That's not how the agents are going to work. So your geolocation controls for fraud detection are about to go out of the window. You could be in London, your agent's sitting or hosted in a machine, somewhere in a far-flung country, and they're doing all of this purchasing for you. Uh, so all of these fraud controls will also have to be re-engineered. And I'm not saying that you can't solve that problem. It's just that that problem will have to be solved a little bit more differently now. So that's the nuance I see that's going to become a lot more relevant on the merchant side. On the consumer side, this is what really gets me a little going. Like we had this really intense conversation with the team earlier this morning. You're talking about the pros and cons of agentic commerce and agents. What I personally do not like and appreciate right now, with the all the talk around agentic commerce and agents buying stuff for you, is what is the independence of these agents? I want an agent that if I'm delegating authority to an agent and I'm being sold the idea that this is exactly the same as me asking my executive assistant to go and like help me buy something, they're truly watching for my interest. I've given them the parameter. This is how much I want to spend. Please look at like these things. And then they're truly fighting for me on my behalf, literally replicating my mindset as a consumer. That's what I want the agent to do. I do not want a Best Buy or a Costco on one side that partners with Google to amp up the ad business, to then have another one of these companies tell me that they're giving me an agent for free that's going to have the best user experience, and I buy into that whole argument, and then I'm asking literally Costco to buy stuff for me or Best Buy to buy stuff for me. That's not the right way, in my opinion, for how e-commerce needs to function. And there are like a lot of like psychological nuances that we can talk about. There are some people who truly love the shopping experience more than the product. I'm one of them. I can spend months, yeah, I can spend months looking for a nice watch, and I wouldn't buy it. And I've gotten feedback a lot of times like, do you really want to buy this watch? And I'm like, I'm actually enjoying this process. Once you get the product, you're like, sure, this is great. But for me, I kind of miss that. That's not everybody. And then you have like people who genuinely feel that whole purchase process is a huge pain in the butt because they have other things to deal with. Like you're also buying uh, sports classes, music classes for kids. You're trying to get them out of the house. You're trying to move to a new place. A lot of those purchases might not be very fun shopping experience. You just need to get that done. Um, but the idea is that these agents need to truly be designed in a way that they're independent, they're working for the consumer. And there is no collusion, so to say, where they're kind of laying in and trying to get influenced by uh, these big corporations that are trying to set the parameters and the patterns for these agents to make sure that that's the only one road that they traverse that only goes to a Best Buy. When I'm buying a television, I love Best Buy. I'm a huge fan, but I need to understand what the cost is across the board. I need to understand who's giving me the best terms for that product. And as a consumer, and I love, being in a capitalistic society, huge fan, that's an option that needs to sit with the consumer and not with the merchant. Yeah, and what basically gets me a little riled up is when I have to go back and look at like let's say government agencies trying to watch for consumer interest. You think of the FTC, you think of like the CFPBs of the world, the FTC specifically. I don't see like there's so much buzz about like agentic commerce, and I'm trying to like talk to folks at the FTC. I'm like, what are you guys thinking about this? Nothing. And you're like, you should be very concerned about a lot of this stuff that's about to like hit all of us in the face. And people like we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, they're very smart consumers. And then we've had a history of things like the subprime lending. Not every consumer is as informed, as smart. You got like vulnerable part of the society. They're gonna get like badly targeted. But if there is no oversight, there's nobody watching the consumers back. That's a problem. So that's my issue with the agent. The agents need to be independent. You know exactly what agent you're working with. You need to know the guardrails that you provided to the agent and what information is being fed to the agent. I need to know. When my agent is making a decision, I need some sort of an explanation and a clarification that they have actually surfaced, they've scanned the horizon 10 times more efficiently than I would have. That's a good agent for me. That's why I need an agent. Otherwise, I think we could easily end up in a deeper monopolistic society and a situation, which again is not good for for the world that we live in.
I share that exact concern because if you think about some of the companies, right, some of the organizations that's coming up with the agents, a lot of them still need a valid business model to work on, right? Think about the open AIs of the world. They are not really making money right now. They need to find ways to make money. Now, what is the conventional wisdom is there's no such thing as a free product. If it's free, we have the product. We end up paying for it. There's nothing to prevent the open AIs of the world to strike special agreements with different big retailers that would say, okay, I will give you preferential treatment and send you more of the traffic if X. And there's no transparency to your point, and we end up becoming on the other side of the road, and the car on the road is self-driving, for lack of a better word, to the destination that has been predetermined for us and maybe not necessarily the best route or the most cost-efficient route. And there are no guardrails. I think my biggest worry is there's no guardrails, which I can actually apply the same worry to a lot of other things right now happening in our space, but we're not going to go there. This is a good leeway to start thinking about accountability, liability. To your point earlier, when we were talking about fraud, right? Chargebacks. Who is on the hook, or do we know who is on the hook if the agent placed a wrong order, or it happens to be someone is using your agent to place an order and you end up having to pay for it? I actually never quite understand how all of that works, because now you have a platform that supplies the agent, you have the merchant, you have the bank, you have the consumer. We have more players, but I don't know if we necessarily have the clarity from a regulatory perspective. Who is accountable when things go wrong? Do we know?
Yeah. So I'll start with the last part. There's no clear regulatory clarity yet. There's nothing that's out there that pins authority when you're using an agent for your shopping experience. Um, would that change? I have a feeling that's going to change fairly quickly. But again, the the regulatory environment we're in right now, my gut feeling is not a political view at all, but my gut feeling is that we're not going to be going moving as fast on regulating the space anytime soon. So it's going to be a little bit of uh, the Wild West for, I'm assuming, about a year and a half once this catches steam. Most big corporations, in any case, when they are going into the adoption stage, they're not going to be worried about, they're going to look at the losses as an investment. Think of like 2011, 2012, when Uber started as a company. We were all getting free rides. They were one fourth the cost of what you're paying for a ride today. We all hated the medallions in New York, the regular taxi ranks, and we eliminated all of them very systematically. And the only option you're left with today is like an Uber and a Lyft, realistically. And the prices have gone up to exactly where they were. You are facing the same issues. So as a consumer, there is an added point of convenience, but my cost has severely gone up. If I had to be in the same financial situation that I was in, let's say in 2012, and Uber was my only option, I think I'd be a little disadvantaged. I'd be a lot more disadvantaged. I don't feel the pain now, but back then, if I had to go back in that state, Uber's the only option. I don't think that's a great value prop. But Uber did not have any issues pouring in a lot of money to just get to acquire a lot of customers, and that's what you're going to see. No regulatory clarity. When you start using the agents and you file chargebacks, you're going to get your money back, no problem. Everybody's going to say sorry. Uh, we'll do better next time. Till the time somebody says, nope, this is your problem, right? Uh, there will be some sort of an operating procedure that the big merchants are going to come up with to be able to go back and assume that if you're using an agent, you're going to end up signing T&Cs at your Amazon account, which basically says if you're going to use an agent, that's your liability and that's your delegate. Anything that the agent executes is on you. So unless you say yes, we are not going to move ahead. But like every time, we're just going to say I agree, yes. You're going to move on, get that 50-60% discount for the first 3 months, and eventually it's going to all come back to you as a consumer. The industry is going to figure out a way to cut their losses. This is something that we've seen time over time. Uh, the big issues and the challenges would be that if we don't have good oversight regulatory clarity, that will be an issue. My only advice to consumers would be to be very, very careful when you're picking the agents that are going to work on your behalf, to understand their independence. Don't pick an agent just because it's free. Don't pick an agent just because you're getting, free stuff. Don't pick an agent because it's just giving you some short-term advantage. Because the problem with the e-commerce industry is your shopping patterns impact the patterns of your family, your friends, your near ones, dear ones. You're not the only person. If I use Amazon and I rave about Amazon, or if I buy stuff off of Shein, I'm just selling. I'm a brand merchant. Like, to my family, I'm saying this is it. I like Lululemon. You gotta buy Lululemon. Let's just do it. All of us. Like, I like this. You should do it. That's how this whole ecosystem works. But if I'm using these agents just because it's free, I'm also activating my friends, my family. They're taking a lot of like people, in our near radius down with us. Just make sure that the agent is, working for you, is a lot more independent. The way you do it, so I actually don't know how that's going to pan out. Like, are we going to be able to go back and design our own agents? How do we go back and create that independence? But yeah, so I can, however, always imagine if I'm going on an Amazon storefront, uh, I would be able to get, like, you already see a left navigation bar that's giving you like an advisor that can help you, like, read through reviews and pick, like, the stuff which is cheapest, quickest delivery, whatever else it might be. I'm going to see an aspect of that sitting outside the platform. That's going to then bring me and my agent down to the platform. But that little agent sitting outside, if that's also an Amazon agent, I have a problem, because that's not how shopping should work. But I
I,
can easily see it happening though.
I think that's exactly what you're going to see, unfortunately. Um, and I get your point about the importance of making sure it's independence. I don't quite know how that will work in the world, especially given that a lot of these companies are putting in the investment in the infrastructure. They're putting in, it's basically upfronting, right? The potential cost. At the end of the day, they need to find a way to recoup that cost, however is going to be like. But I do have a question, because seeing how this is playing out, it almost feels like we've seen it before. We've seen that story play out before in different forms. What would you advise a bank if they're sitting in front of you? They're like, Josh, what should we do with this agentic commerce thing? What would you tell them to consider, the top few things they need to think about when they're looking at how this place will play out? What is your biggest worry?
Like banks specifically,
Yeah.
or like, yeah. So we guys, yeah, that's a great question. So we guys work a lot with um, banks, sponsor banks, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of payment companies. Think of like card issuers, the Marqetas, Lithics of the
Yes.
world, Stripes and the Addians on the payment side. We guys also work with companies like travel hospitality. Think of like a Booking.com, Priceline, Agoda, Kayak, OpenTable.
And checkout.com, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. So those, imagine like those, there's a ripe use case for those type of companies that we've been discussing very actively for a very, very long time. When I say long time, I mean like 6 8 months. They've been on this journey pretty much. If I'm saying this Christmas I want to be in Japan with my family, and I think everybody's gonna fly business, only one stop, but we want to stay at a Marriott property that is category X, and we want to be in like these regions, and my date range is X and Y, but my budget for the entire trip is, I don't know, 15 18,000 dollars, whatever it might be. So this is a good parameter for me to set for my agent, where then that agent can go and make all of these decisions fairly effectively. When we're talking to a sponsor bank, or let's say a program manager, this is the kind of a product we're saying, hey, you need to design. The
Mm-hmm.
way, let's say, the travel industry works is when you go, let's say, make a booking on one of these platforms, the platform then has partnered with either one of these big brand hotels or flight companies or a mom and pop bread and breakfast somewhere. And there's a lot of like virtual cards that get exchanged when you check in, and they're like checking you and you've already paid in one of these platforms. That money hits like when you show up at the desk and they get like a virtual card. They don't tell you, but they're keying that in. They get paid, they give you the keys, you go in and then you get out, whatever. But if you think about like agentic commerce, if they don't bake this whole flow uh, in how their payments are functioning, that's, they're going to miss out on opportunity. The interesting aspect also is that the travel hospitality industry is also considered high risk. So it's considered high risk predominantly because big ticket items like the ticket price is higher. It's a future date, when the transaction actually occurs. And chargebacks generally are higher in that industry. So you need to watch the chargebacks very, very closely. When I booked this trip in January for my Christmas vacation, and the next January is when I come back and I'm like, I don't like this trip. And I'm going to go file a chargeback and I'm going to blame the agent and I'm going to blame the merchant and I'm going to blame the platform. You're now working at a 1 year lag. So if you're the issuer, or if you're the program manager, or if you're the platform, our advice to them is make sure you've got a good determination if you're gonna let agents execute on behalf of customers. Firstly, you need to know what this agent was. What is the identity of this agent? Can you go back and recall and recreate the action of the agent? Do you have a pretty set input attribution where you can go back even after a year and exactly demonstrate that this is the request that they came with, this is what we delivered, and this is the service that the airline provided, this is the service that the hotel provided. Therefore, this chargeback is invalid. Otherwise, it's going to be a pretty big chargeback that's going to hit you in your face. There's also a challenge like what happens when the flight was just maybe 6 hours delayed because of a snowstorm, and I ended up taking a different flight, and now I don't agree with that whole charge. So these are some systemic, like big issues that the industry already faces. But now, since you've inserted another party, which is a delegate of the consumer, in the mix, you're now fighting or justifying the actions of that agent in the middle. So that data layer has to be pretty solid. You need to be able to go back and triangulate the entire transaction and demonstrate exactly what happened to figure out like where does the responsibility lie. So while we are telling them to suss out all of these use cases and not let these opportunities slip by, these are the things that the uncool and the unsexy things that we are telling them to prepare for, rather than just jump on the bandwagon and say we're going to push the envelope and see where it goes. There is also a pretty significant financial crimes angle that does get involved, which is beyond fraud and chargebacks, is one of, I mean, there's like a bunch of them. I'm not going to go and talk about all the different controls that would play in, but think of like a geolocation control by from a sanctions perspective. There is an expectation that by OFAC that if the requests are coming for transaction requests are coming from, let's say, sanctioned countries, you're supposed to block them. So typically, if you try and, let's say, access Stripe.com from Iran, there's a high likelihood that all the IPs and anything coming from that location is all going to be blocked. You can't send money, you can't receive money. That also gives a lot of advantage to the same countries for them to be able to go back and host a bunch of these agents outside to go around and circumvent a lot of these geolocation controls. It does happen even today, by the way. It's not rocket science. You can use a VPN, read out your request, but when you can do this at scale and make it look supremely normal, right now we have tools in the bank that can detect VPN transactions. We can detect transactions that are trying to layer and muddy the IP addresses. And these IP addresses are also, the efficacy is only like 60, 70%. They're not perfect. But you're expected to make the best effort to make sure that you're not servicing users in those countries. It's just going to become a little bit of a norm for you to not rely on your geolocation controls as much as we do right now, which means, that's going to be a gaping hole. And then there are like a few other issues and concerns you're going to run into. You'll be able to so there are like other financial crimes patterns, like when you try to do as a human a lot of transactions in a very short burst of time. We have rules in the back that try to pick up that behavior. When agents are doing that, that's expected behavior. If my agent is trying to spin virtual cards, is trying to move, all the payouts in one go, that's expected behavior, but that's not expected human behavior. There are like clocks, timers, tickers. Like if you make, I don't know, 500 transactions in under 30 seconds, exceeding a certain value, they're going to get flagged, they're going to get blocked. Somebody might go back, and there's a high likelihood that you're using either bots or using a bunch of different things to do it. And it is considered suspicious. But with agents and the proliferation of agentic commerce, it's just going to be a bit of a norm, which means we'll have to rethink a lot of the backend controls. So that's our general advice to most of the financial services companies, to think about when you're thinking about the agentic infrastructure. Don't forget about the the risk and the compliance controls that need to go hand in hand, because a lot of these controls will have to be drastically re-engineered, and you need to rethink them. Don't wait. Don't have that whole shoot first, think later attitude. It's never helped anybody. But yeah.
I thought that's what we do. Build it, they'll come, and then throw it on the wall to see what sticks. That certainly do feel like that's been the going norm right now in the whole world of AI everything. I do have to ask you before you go, because that's been on my mind, right? There's no lack of PRs that says, oh, X company, I won't name names here because there are too many of them. We are piloting agentic commerce infrastructure. We are going to be supporting this. We're doing that. There's so many of them. But yet, just in the last half hour when we were talking, there are all these additional things in the back end that we need to think about. There is a regulatory framework that is not quite ready. We haven't even talked about the legacy tech stack that we had that will need time to update. It's not something like you just bolt it on and flip the switch and be done. So, against the backdrop of everyone in our industry being so excited about the potential of this, are we premature? And the second part of the question is, do you think consumers are ready? I mean, building is one part. There's already enough things we need to worry about. But do we really think consumers going to come? Maybe
Oh,
not for me, but curious about the others. I'm not giving
heavy,
my payment details to some bots that's going to do stuff for me.
this is a heavy question. So, but maybe it's a contrarian thought. Um, I I am very bullish on the prospects of agentic commerce becoming ginormous. There's no question about it. And the reason is, I'm a firm believer that in any fight, technology typically wins. And think of tech has this power of producing products that at times we know we need them, at times we don't know we need them, at times when they're launched, you're like, yep, that's a novelty. And then we end up paying for them and the subscriptions, and we don't bat an eyelid. Um, think of things like DoorDash and others and Uber Eats. When these products were launched, I was scratching my head thinking, who the hell is going to pay a monthly fee to just get food delivered to you, and get your groceries delivered? There are people who I truly know enjoyed the run to the grocery store. It's an experience that has changed.
I love grocery shopping, but
I love
that's me.
it. But I feel like the systemic change is like for me, when I'm trying to like scan the horizon, I'm trying to talk to a lot of my nieces and nephews like who are in like school. And I'm asking them like, hey, do you want to go to the grocery store? They don't want to go to the grocery store. Like for them, it is a lifesaver for them when they feel like, oh, we've got these, hunger pangs at like 1 in the morning, they're studying for an exam, and we just like order in some food. This is a lifesaver. And here I'm thinking, by the time they're in their 40s, the ecosystem is going to be very, very, very different. You and I might still be the only ones walking the grocery store if a grocery store exists by then. Uh, but the future of this world is unfortunately not you or me. It's a lot of these, younger kids, but they're definitely and not being conditioned in a bad way, but their ecosystem is a lot different and it's going to be phenomenally different. These products are being designed for them, right? It's going to be very, very different for them as they grow up and how they use a bunch of these products. So, is technology going to win 100%? Are we going to be able to go back and make these products a reality? Absolutely, yes. We live in a capitalistic world. There are profits, there are investments. Consumers are going to come. We're going to make the consumers come. If they don't come, we're going to brainwash them to be there. If you can't brainwash them, we're going to take every other opportunity away from them. Make sure that they're there. That's what we do. It's going to happen. I would not bet my money on trying to slow this down. However, the conversation we were having earlier this morning with the team, all I was telling the team was like, if you see like a public-private partnership, if you see somebody like like the FTC looking out for like comments, looking out for like consumer feedback, like what do you guys want? Just show up to those meetings. Do whatever you can to voice your opinion. Make sure you make some noise and making sure these agents are independent. They're playing for you. That's what's gonna make the playing field even. Right now, we are independent consumers, but you have no clue and no idea how much you're getting influenced by every time you hop on to one of these portals when you see influencers wearing, certain clothes, going to certain places, going to like, having certain drinks. There is a conditioning happening to the best of us where you feel you're in control, but that control is being taken away from you, not in a bad way, but that's just how marketing works. That control needs to live with the consumer for the society to stay balanced, in my opinion. And for that to happen, agents will be there. The merchants are going to set up all this infrastructure, but we need good standardization where you understand what the agent is doing. And one of the maybe a crucial risk that we didn't truly address is when this agent is going to truly work for me. Let's say there's in a hypothetical world, there is this hypothetical agent that just is going to replicate my mindset and maybe 100 times more effectively and efficiently because that's a machine. The amount of information this agent now needs to have about me is 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 shocking, and it scares me a little bit because you're talking about buying patterns, browsing patterns, sleeping patterns, health patterns. It's if for this agent to be really effective, it just needs to know everything that's in my head, right? It's going to be very effective. But that's again a major risk because no one's watching out for the consumer. If the agent's leaking this information tomorrow for whatever reason, I need to know that I can control that leak. I need to know I can, cut my losses. I need to know there is a way of like, keeping the agent like safe and secure. It's just important. But what worries me is like we're all gonna start using agents. We already like give out a bunch of our information for free. Uh, that I feel like is not good for consumer behavior, like in the long run. And I feel the detrimental impact is on people, but I also worry about a lot of these merchants once the trust erodes entirely from the larger financial services ecosystem. It's going to be very, very hard to bring the same consumers back. So, being again a fan of capitalism, if you ask me, like, in the long run, agents not being in the consumer's control, I think that's not good for the economy. For capitalism to grow and to keep options open, not concentrated, monopolies, diluted, and the consumer to have the right options. I think that independence in the agent is probably one of the most important things. If I was a Best Buy, if I was a Google, Meta, if I was a Costco, as much as I'm spending time figuring out the infrastructure, I would have all of my policy people start educating the FTC aggressively, helping them rewrite some basic rules, building consortiums, enlightening customers, getting customer thoughts, comments, feedback, and building that ecosystem that actually allows me to shop more. They do want to sell more products, so let me shop more. But unfortunately, I think from a large corporation perspective, you want me to shop more, but you also want like full control, end to end, which I feel is not good in the long run.
That is a lot of food for thought. I do agree. I think data privacy control, permissioned access is
Right.
a never ending topic that we need to make sure that we keep an eye on. I love your advice to your team that show up when policymakers are looking for comments because someone has to stand up for the customers, someone has to advocate for them. And there's no one else better to do that than people who are actively involved in the ecosystem. So kudos for that.
Thank
And I can't wait to see what's going to transpire as much as I'm a techie and I love technology and I think this is really cool. I keep thinking about pets.com, remember? .com days, pet.com, and I keep thinking, wow, that was spectacular. And then look at where we are right now with Amazon and the like. So it is a ever evolving landscape. The one thing, if there is anything I wish we could do better, is when we're talking about protocols, we're talking about standards. I hope that we can actually have a consortium of players and a neutral standards body to control it. I will feel much better as a consumer rather than having big corporates being in charge of designing and controlling and developing the protocol. I just don't have a good feeling about that. But again, that's just me. So, with that being said, thank you so much for joining us on the show, Jazz. I always feel like every time I talk to you, it's a masterclass. So, I learned something new. Appreciate you. And can't wait to meet again in person, I'm sure in one of the events this year. And until then, thank you and be well. And for the rest of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of One Vision. We'll talk to you next week.